So, are there any questions at this point? Yes.
I'll try to say it. Sometimes when I try to practice cherishing others or seeing them as worthy of our compassion and loving kindness, then it turns into arrogance. And then sometimes the opposite happens, like when I try to have compassion towards myself, then it becomes like self-pity and poor me, why is this happening to me? So how do we overcome this with this practice in our everyday life?
Tini Quran chiwa di dirt, manzo jundu nyamlin chiwa jurim la asra, ini sosogi ini shen la chebar zimbe ra, shen chebar zimba ini tapshi chigi yusra, ina shen chebar zimba tapshi chidi zimba ini shen la da nyingji che rungwa res ra, che weba res, chamba gom weba re la ni samla tong yung di zimba asra, susu nang la dis kengba do ra, nga je do di de yang che yung du usra, yang kap gare la yang susu la yang nyingji gome ra. Rangi susu la chamda nyingji gome tapshi che du zamba asra, yang chimaro ngala dinde kharchan chungi yorila na yang sem dugda du usra, susu pado ma shum du usra. Che zani nganzu ki kaya lai ki nyamling ki jurim lai ra, yang na tsam kengba ra da nga je che ya shen la migdu zamba ra, yang susu la migdu zamba yang susu sem diz ma shum du ya do dinde yungu do as. Didu zamba ni donglen khante che gori bes.
Da jela niji chidi kala karchela
Susu la dis kengba do yora, ngaja do che ngu dus.
Nani la hicheni ma lo ma shimdo era. Okay. Re ta ngazon zamza phagile niji la undigala susu tes I kalorte. Phagi niji sadile tes thoy biro chili legora. Hine zamza ngazo ta ngazo de niji da lagi jir piti ro legda ra. Hine ngazo niji la de gala nangchu to la niji shiwana chidang yi shin ji phagi dungi la nani. Dungi de masu bulo chermada 콜 통중도 최소도 nga 콜에 야가스 요사 치부치다 말이라 바이서나 둥이 콜은 둥이 옛날에는 둥이들 쓸래는 가래나 거뭐 콜에나 거 말에 근데 둥이 ngani 이제 문제 받지 봐야 맞지라 따디 둥이들 테로치네 치마롱 사에 로치라 제당한테 희jel라오라 드드가래네 콜에 치 최소도 통중도다 되는 게 말sam들아 근데 nga제 켈레 고야스지요 말에 칼라나 Tine dungi de ngala munde bajira. Ane nga kola toaye ko chungo ji mare same. Tinde lo da kashi chegi yesigi ra. Ta ine china hiji ngola ende tinde jide. Nganzo phagi midla mi chu dila nga kola toaye ko ngala ma do hiji tisa chibuchi marra. Dungi de mi dungi de tero china chi maro ne bulo chi ko ra. Ta rani la ani susugi chi hiji che dilo shimro de da. Ta sosola susu nga hiji ro sa chi le on ji ra. Ine di ta ta kan dis le na ra ina ta kan ji sosola nganzo gi lo di che ren bo jin ro go ke cham da ra. Chi mi jo ji thong na nga shibu yin sa nga ji de ma che ji ra. Chanyam bo nga khole ji 그러나 네가는 팔레 무시바 말이라 다나가서 미쪽으로 치통나 마시부이 코가래 쪼도선나 콜레 통주로 치소로 마이게 난 잠자 소소를 토하지 미지 통나 소소가 배가 마오이 전부 미지 미니미선 소소소소로 많이 nhập지 마이 라 간지 드주 상마 따바 템보 말은 잠자 쳐토는 잠자 코토를 템보요 말은 소소 템보 가리네 지 야두 가리네 세 지바로 네트에데 베케 참다 라 세상 아주 딘데기 초아슈 침불레운데 생각이 돼라 잠자는 시부 인상 아지치 잠자는 앞에 쪼부 인상마 빠싱데 되게 소소라 소소 투된 라인에 그래 지단기 내가 가르치나 딘데 슈 침부 제입니다 라
Okay, now with regards to the question about how one seems to develop a sense of arrogance when one generates love and compassion towards others, and how similarly one begins to give in to self-pity when one generates love and compassion towards oneself. Now herein, I think these kind of problem arises when we are not able to differentiate between pity and compassion. So many times we equate pity with compassion. For example, when we look at someone who is worse off than us, then we look at that person and then begin to develop a sense of pity and equate that with compassion. So from a Buddhist perspective, that is not exactly compassion. Compassion is not aimed in its essence at the person themselves. It is more concerned with the suffering of the person. So as such, there is a process of relating to the suffering first. So, for example, we begin to understand compassion in this manner: a wish to free others from suffering, the wish to alleviate the suffering of others. So this compassion that we need to generate and develop is aimed at alleviating the suffering itself. So as such, it is distinct from looking at the person who is suffering as someone who is worse off than us, or someone who is, in some sense, maybe if we look at them with pity, then we hold ourselves to be somewhat better or better off. So that's not the attitude that compassion generates. Compassion is aimed at alleviating the suffering of others, with the understanding that if this suffering happens to me, then I wouldn't want it for myself at all. So as such, you want to alleviate the suffering for others. So there is no manner in which we can begin to think of ourselves as better off, think of ourselves as better, because we know that we would suffer in a similar manner if the same thing happens to us. So it comes from such a place, compassion. So that's why it is important that we really look at the distinction between pity and compassion. So compassion is aimed at the suffering, mainly at the suffering of others, and whereas pity seems to be more concerned with the person itself. Now, similarly, when we are talking about self-pity, when we give into self-pity, when we are talking about practicing compassion towards ourselves. Now, it is important to understand that when we say that we have to practice love and compassion, it comes from a personal realization, personal appreciation for the fact that just as I would cherish happiness for myself, I need to be able to cherish happiness for others. Just as I wouldn't want suffering for myself, I wouldn't want suffering for others. So this is the ground or the basis from which we approach positive qualities such as love and compassion. So cherishing others come from a deep appreciation for the manner in which we cherish ourselves first. So as such, we can now understand that it is different, pity and compassion. And now when you say that when you are practicing compassion towards yourself, then at moments you give into self-pity. Now, I don't exactly understand how this happens, because if we are able to kind of look at that first, that you cherish yourself, indeed, you cherish the experience of happiness for yourself, so similarly, you extend that towards others. And now, in all facets of life, when we are looking at our mind, it is important that we approach it equanimously. For example, many times the manner in which we relate to others in a better position or in a worse position than ourselves is when we look at people who are in a worse position than ourselves, we begin to develop a sense of arrogance, somehow that I am better than this person. Even if we say that we are practicing compassion, because it comes from a misconceived notion of compassion, wherein we begin to pity them. Then similarly, this attitude now is reflected on ourselves when we begin to practice compassion, and when we look at someone else who is better off than ourselves, then we begin to feel sometimes a little down, wherein we begin to look down on ourselves, look down our own abilities sometimes. This is almost the same side of the same side of the same thing. Yes, different sides of the same thing. And so as such, it is important to develop an equanimous attitude, understanding that these situations, these status, situations, and are not permanent and absolute in themselves. That one day you might find yourselves in the same position, sometimes worse off, sometimes better off. So as such, it is pointless to fix an absolute identity on this kind of status and this kind of situations. Yes.
Penang gombala chinjuga lajun shirigala genge labje de nair zerachi na pugu ni shitarang den yorwa sem chi khashi ya shingere khashi shara shingi mare khashi ya chenyi tsoyala ya koyena ya lol singyala kale khabu khashi ya lol singyala le la na tsoyala ga khashi thiya ya bo khashi inje ya bo ya bo ndam no yor ne dang ra taine dinde chungdu gen de nganzo gantu kar sungolan changze itsetang an so jasha ya koro ra ndechena tamani ma tasu ngaji cheni yang zira chung karsan zira le sun zira chi baina ya lo me ala thonju cheni ma res wa thudu gala chuna le ngaji ro wa ta pe ya por nga ya shu yin samme ge lo dile na mi shimbala ta su le khia khazir tazul ta ne chuna ke ku chi ma res ya ma te su su ma pa be samda ta yang zamzang ga tang ha ke ku ji shingi men do nga karin labzai karin na shingi men de ja cha ya por ai men de nga ya po jang to men de ma chobu ju santana kyöda ge ta lo tsechi bai na suzu chungba chungsu ma la che de de nyora lo jong ko ko marani nani tende ga kashi lo tsechi bai na ko ko marani jangma tu tendel ta na kya ya oz re de res yang tu zul ma ta ores yang an sei ma shin de ga la dile ma chu al ta na ya susu sem de ya par lo sem shu lo go ro de ya par yang shubu ji yin sang a je che na susu le kya njwa tu zul ta na ani ma cha 디퍼루 세상은 찬양보 로고를 씁니다. 세상 근두가 니마지 간서 되는 곰도다 지당간서 그냥 치디 송사 수수기 샘데야 베데 팡 터르도이나 다 추기 추기 게인사라 팡 터르도디가래 수수 마알다 그랬어. 아니 마 수수베 마빠 심디디가래 딜레 아니 칼로 딜레 마 올라 마 유니도 들었다나 야야 팡 터르는 그랬습니다. 전참마 쇼직도 그러다. 세상은 저 로드 츠렘보 샤페 계십니다.
So it is very important to develop a balanced outlook towards our situations in our lives. That is what we mean by developing an equanimous attitude. For example, when we were young nuns, our teachers used to advise us in this manner, that in a class there are students of varying capacities, and as such, some students are very good at debate, logical debate. Some students who are very good at memorization. Some students who are really good at composition. Some students who are very good at elocution, and so forth. So everybody has their own unique abilities, and it is the case that maybe the students who are really good at debate are not particularly good at memorization. Then similarly, students who are very good at composition are maybe are not the most eloquent or eloquent people when they have to speak. So now there are many exams, tests, and such in the school. So as such, our teacher used to advise us that when you perform well in your studies, in these tests, it is important not to develop an attitude of arrogance, thinking that you have performed the best out of all the students, and as such you are the best. Because once you assume such an attitude, then it closes the door on learning, further learning, and then you no longer now relate with your fellow classmates as equals. You begin to look down on them. And this is not an attitude that we should cultivate. So at that moment, when you find yourself filled with a sense of arrogance, then he advises us that he advised us to think about that even though you performed well in this part of the text, there are people who perform much better in other aspects. and people who are much more well versed in other areas. So as such, when you begin to realize this, then naturally you become humble. You become humble that okay, maybe that's not the attitude to adopt. And then similarly, when you do not perform well in your exams, tests, and so forth, then it is important that we not lose heart and we begin to bully ourselves, saying that, oh, I'm incapable of doing this. I'm incapable of doing this, and I didn't perform at all. So at that point, when we become demotivated, when we begin to lose heart, it is important to now at this point motivate ourselves, thinking about the fact that there are so many people who do not even have the opportunity to study these, even if they want to, and that you yourself have the opportunity. And there are so many people who, even if they want to study and practice these things, they cannot ever find the opportunity, or their faculties, the state of their faculties, do not allow them because they are intellectually challenged and so forth. So when you begin to think about this, then you begin to become more motivated. So in this manner, we need to develop a balanced outlook towards the situations that we face in our lives, or the situations that we find ourselves in. And this is, I think, exactly the reason His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he was giving a teaching, talked about the importance of developing a balanced approach, an equanimous attitude in our practice, wherein when we begin to observe our mind, and when the mind becomes too uplifted for its own good, then it is important to kind of bring the mind down to its natural state. And then when the mind becomes too withdrawn into itself, when it becomes too bogged down, demotivated, then it is important to uplift the mind a little bit at that point. So this is the manner in which one must realistically adopt a balanced outlook, an equanimous attitude.
现在讲这个偏去年的戏了哟，对别个民族了，没别每个民族性，偏些rangi的练的把人接，接不停的出，是吧？
사절레시.
사실이 그래. 그 오늘 배 딩간저 삼타에 백해 좀 니르니르라. 미지 떨었다는 쇼쇼 가고에 말스. 처럼 메라탄이야. 그래. 미지 메라탄 땅아 메라탄데 쇼쇼 뭐 쪼고예요 말스. 야, 떨었다니야. 그래. 간저 센데 초 농부치 랭오다. 메라탄에 배 두주주 떨었다는 쇼 가쳐 되네 마이. 계산 대란랑이 연대 가리는 되게 딱딱지 번네 되어이나. 되네 집에 되네 초이나스라. 그 오늘 배 고지쇼다. 그래.
And in one of the classical Tibetan works by the master Sajapandita, called the Good Sayings of Sajapandita, he makes this point: to not to become discouraged when others criticize or belittle you, to not to become arrogant when others begin to praise you, and to maintain one's own qualities as they are. That is the mark of a learned one. So I think this is a very realistic approach, that we should not become discouraged, demotivated when others begin to criticize us, that we should not become too arrogant and become full of ourselves when others begin to praise us, because this does not in effect have any effect on our qualities really, because they remain as they are, these qualities that we have. The praise and blame doesn't effectively change them. So as such, to maintain our qualities as they are, that is the mark of a learned one.
다 가정기 두와지라 두와라는 것도 gonda 두와지 상수시진 봐. 근데 미시바디 칼라는 코랑이다 나초자치. 나초나라는 저 젠팽이 로르 마버시기도 아스트라. 디체 아니 코랑이다 젠팽이 로체다 라데 도션 초시 라데 초르타에게 근데 자기 시에게 되버이스. 아니 레가 치디 카유라이라레 한데스타 오레레도. 다리 간도 다 나초도랑 저 젠팽이 로라디로 근데 상당 오래돼 당한도 주소는 니마니마 내가 지디가 수술래가 지지 자시 전에 주니 줬음다 지지 그 가르치기에는 디 내가 집이링래 수술 하선난다 라 뭐고 전대매 봐 아니 지기 가리네 지 신래 팬빌래가 간도 제여라 직변에 상한도 있으면은 지 칼라서에는 투댕이 있잖아 밀래 팬 수술 총다 계산 집어만 이게 양한도 근데 서여라 chala ina chi chala chongro za na juchen ro chi suni ina ya ko ya po pu ta bo me le phen ba ji sam ta ina ti le phen se chi le ngo da ra so so ngu sa ya da so so ke me da so so tam hen da chi po sam ta na digo mara che zang zo chi le ga so so chi khala ji so ina re chong ja ina re le kun le ga che ina re lap re ge ge ina re ta ngam zo le ga che le ku zo ta da khari ni yo ro 티디가 사상난다 거의 이내 제 미기 강라 따니기 통마 통마 임바 소소 찍기 렌세 빠지게 사는 자체 못 안으라 신뢰 배빌라 같이 저래 다 란데 도충 초시로 실레서 란데 충으로 당
랑진지
란진제 충단 라 란진제 디 소소 폐게 신라 사는 땅와이나 신라 사는 자체 못 땅와이나 라니 집은 좀 때도 충충도에 임바라 kalana jens ne thaye bare ran ne chipochire jen kala samtari kala rani be nga shui sa nga chipo lo zen ni de rashu khuni lo kala ngedaro shira ra jen ja chama samta rani chipon zabani de cheta jen sana ja chama ta ena rashi gi phage dila ran de chung ran chen zen de shu chung do yin bar ra tat nire lega chiri khayu la che chang sana khara ta wala na ta gi de thar chi par ra chi le ngoko jende me ba lega tambo ta che dia lega khar che ne pa phen bi sa no tan che ye de pe ke cham bar da.
So now at this point I want to address some of the sharings and expectations that we discussed in the first session. So one of us talked about how they observed the importance of altruism in the Buddhist teachings and how they want to overcome the self-cherishing attitudes that we have, and how they want to practically imbibe these altruism in their daily lives as in their professional lives. Now, when we are talking about developing altruism as an antidote to overcoming our self-cherishing attitudes, it is, I think, important to understand that if we are indeed to overcome self-cherishing attitude, it is important first that we develop a sense of contentment, having few desires and being content. And this, if we reflect on this, then this can be the first step towards overcoming our self-cherishing attitudes. Now, with regards to the question about how they want to imbibe and inculcate these altruistic practices in their daily and professional lives, I think the manner in which we live our lives, we go about with our jobs, can itself become a spiritual practice if we approach it in the right manner. So, for example, any kind of work that we do for our livelihood can become a part of our spiritual practice if we approach it with integrity, if we approach it with a pure motivation, if we approach it with a wish to be of service, to be of benefit for others, and without ever resorting to backhandedness, without ever resorting to manipulative practices. If we are able to do this, then what we do for work can itself become a spiritual practice. For example, it could be the case that you open a small restaurant or a cafe, and if you approach with a pure motivation, with integrity, with an intention to be of benefit for others, then the food you serve wouldn't be adulterated. The food that you serve would take into account the health and well-being of others, and what you are providing as a form of service is now of benefit for others. Then similarly, even if you want to sell certain products, if you have integrity, good motivation, and if you have the wish to be of benefit for others, then you would make sure that the product does not harm the others, the environment, or environment in the long run. So this is the manner in which we can shape the manner in which we pursue livelihood as a part of our spiritual practice. And now, when we are talking about overcoming this self-cherishing attitude and to develop altruism in its place, I think it is important to reflect on the self-cherishing attitude and altruism in this manner, that when we begin to think about ourselves, it's just one person. When we begin to think about others, it's infinite, it's immense. So as such, we begin to understand the ramification that you yourself, it only relates to one particular individual. When you begin to relate to others, it's infinite, it's immense. So based on that consideration, it can also help us to overcome our very narrow-minded way of thinking, to open up our motivation to include the benefit and welfare of all sentient beings. Thus.
Ta chi khala na ani na shu ko to tin ser ta ya da ani nyere lan ta wa ta ti nyere lan ta wa da do sa ta na shu tin ser ta wa ina chidang ye ta ang te da mu da lo ya chera ani ti san ta ja na la na khoi na sun chu ma ma na da to zo le ni ani so so chi ke ko ra che de che la chi che shu ga do ya da tin de che wa ina na shu ko to de tin ser do re sam dra
So now, moving on, one of us talked about how they want to deepen their understanding of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practices, and how they want to practically, how they want to inculcate this practically in their daily lives. Now, with regards to how to inculcate these spiritual practices in our daily lives, we already talked about it we talked about it quite extensively. Now, if we want to deepen our understanding of the practices and philosophy of Buddhism, I think it is important first to take some time to study them. And you can take the time to read the many different texts that exist. And in this day and age, access to the teachings is very, very easy, because on the internet you can find so many teachings and you can take your pick from any teaching that you can relate to. But with that being said, I think it is important to really take the time, to dedicate some time to study of Buddhism before we can effectively inculcate these as a part of our practice.
Chidangi na chule nganzu chik jang nam san she ji de mare ra chidangi patin so jani na pe nganzu chong pa ba shi wa na she jung chim de jani na de ring la war kisi ta de ji jang de shen su sa na yang ja de la ta je je shin ju je yang ja dang do pho de ya de ta de ba shin ju jin ta she sa na yang ja ba chen na pa che ju ma chong pa ba shin zo yam da chik ji le chik thön de de ro ji yin la war ra che ta in zang zang te bram le de su su gi kha jang ta ni su su gi chik lo da cham ba khar do tambu din lo ye ke chim boda thabu din ma lo jin su su o ding al lo na phensa re pe na nga kon do chim bo jin zo bo gom da ro nga chi cha ba chim bo jin cha be yim ba da ro ani chi nam du na ja jin de chi na chu ngo te ra chi chi tambu din de jin ngo tu ani ya thot do te ke chim boda shin ba yang tambu do thobu chi jin pe han do ma bo ji ja jang chi an ting sa bu ji ma she ani ta na chi chim do ji la na ya ya mu da ra tambu chin ju ne ngo tu na pha le chi de ke chi.
So now, with that being said, I think it is important to take a gradual approach towards your study of Buddhism, taking small steps rather than immediately hoping to see results and immediately being able to understand the philosophy and practices. Because really, when we look at the greater study of Buddhism, its philosophy and its practices, it is understood as peeling layers of onion. The more you peel it, the more you have to peel. Because when we look at the study of the great classical treatises, then it is indeed the case that you might, after studying, you might come to the impression, now I understand it. But if you study it further, then you begin to question yourself. And then you come to feel that, okay, now I understand, my questions are addressed. Then when you begin to study it further, then more questions arise. So the study of Buddhism is similar to peeling onions. There is more to peel, more to unpack, more to understand, more to study all the time. So if we understand this about Buddhism, then maybe we can, from the outset, approach it in a more meaningful and wise manner. We should not ever immediately hope to understand all the subtle aspects of the philosophy and practice. So as such, it is important to look at yourself and see what relates to you the most. In this sense, when I say that to check what relates most to yourself, I'm saying what practices, what philosophy, what part of the philosophy appeals most to you, makes sense for you, in the sense that if you struggle with attachment, if you struggle with anger and so forth, then what kind of Buddhist practices, what kind of Buddhist teachings really appeals to you, and then approach it from that, start from there. And if you are totally new to Buddhism, then do not ever hope to immediately understand like Tantra and the sutras and all. Maybe it's better to first have an introduction to Buddhism rather than immediately trying to understand all this. So take a gradual, sensible approach to your study of the Buddhist philosophy and practice.
Kita shungza chambai na dinde tesi jang tanga di jang sa de shingye la ngune gi pa zaji tang da di ya po shin me ba mi ji tu ta na ta ta la me jo so so gi san na ta na ta ma hin tanga di min sam gi nga gi chi chi ni chi ma la na dinde ji pen do yo ma ra so chule de so jang sa da nga di jang la ngome ma ra so so gi ji tu ya ra ana zo chule de ka zan nga zo lo ma ru ba de tu ya ne ba shulo la nda cha bo ji bo je choto de go ya ke ma so the ngaran sen de ma jo tang ya ko gan la sha tu na tin di ra.
So many times it is the case that people who are new to Buddhism become really taken away by the fancy titles of the texts, and then they begin to immediately study these because it appears exotic, new to them. But these are high-level texts, and then they take the appearance that they have understood it. And when we caution them, then maybe they do not really have any foundational understanding of these texts at all. And it doesn't really make any sense that you begin to approach your study of Buddhism in this manner. So rather than that, it is important to understand what exactly does spirituality mean in the Buddhist context, how it relates to subduing our own mind stream, how it's a process of inner transformation, not about changing other people's outlook of you. So this is important. So maybe there is a Rinpoche, and he used to tell this story, how sometimes maybe taking a purely intellectual approach towards the study of Buddhism and its practices is not the approach. So Rinpoche, he was visiting a Dharma Institute in the West, and then he ran into a resident of the Dharma Institute, and the Dharma Institute began to complain to him that now I have understood everything about emptiness, I have understood everything about Dzogchen practice, but I have a big trouble staying in the monastic institute. And then the Rinpoche asked him, what exactly is your trouble? And he says, I am not able to get along with the people in the Dharma Institute. This is my biggest problem. So then the Rinpoche said, okay, maybe that's not the approach you need to take. He spent so much time in trying to understand these texts, such as Dzogchen texts and the text on emptiness, that he failed to appreciate that true spiritual practice is built in the interactions that we have with others. So he advised him to study texts like this, the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva and the 8 verses of training the mind.
Yes. 직 행아도 이제 돈에 마장도 배 샤샤인다 그래라 딱 한지 직 대분정도 타고 통대가 좀 말로는 따뜻히 신사만서 봐 샤샤해도 벤즈레 때도 실라다 그라 따이네 점장한테 소소기 직록 아니 로드가 자원이는 고위 민도나 그라 대비는 냐드네 패키지 뭐라 나랑 이게 말에 진유해 나도 신의 장도 못 쓰입니다 나체도 타고 전 니네 대디파 밀리터로 다 소소기 직된데 지금이 칼란 단다마고나 제제랑아 구그레사면 샤샤요 안디니 단다 소소기 네체 가주주 구도 때문에 이자차 갑주 투주 딘주든데 코니 로 레하보라 아니 근데를 콩콩콩 인게마처럼 이게 마고니 베드 타보 제 마고니데 야 주말로니 숨젤로데 야 코니 차요 아 디디가를 소소 야제 가주도 하고 이게 저런 고요 말 신기요 말 뺏갈래요나 질라 오타 딘딘 레샬라냐 양자 디테블 트로체 딘리도 라 세상한테 대변 리부체야 아니 대 카고 있는 데지 샤야 심발로 아니야 심바 다이 칼카우디 로지마지마이나 다와지마이나 레치 털 로냐 고야랑 해야 되죠.
Now, moving on, one of us talked about how they found when they initially came to read this particular text, the 37 verses of training, 37 practices of all the Bodhisattva, then how they found the text too poetic in its nature for their taste, and how then they returned it back to the library. And now when you do this, then you are effectively almost giving up on the text. So I wouldn't advise that kind of approach. I personally have have similar experiences. When I approach some text initially, it's very obtuse, the language itself, very difficult to approach. It's not accessible at all. But it's important not to give up on a Dharma text like that immediately. It could be the case that maybe our experiences haven't been shaped in a way to truly appreciate a text like this, or our foundational understanding has not been developed to an extent wherein we are able to appreciate such a text. But to keep the book with you, and to always find the time to approach it later on. And when you approach it later on, many times it is indeed the case that you are more enthusiastic later on when you read it, and that the text, they reveal its meaning to you in a way that it didn't before. So as such, it is important to keep this kind of Dharma texts, which appear initially inaccessible or unrelatable at first, close by ourselves, and through our experience, through our study, there comes a point wherein the meaning of these texts reveal themselves to us later on when we approach it.
Chigi kala na konangi da chuche la ra nang chuche la ani senshu do senshu phaya chi ta de le yin la dura ne ina tan da tu da ta go da thdi ga na ani chi chu shu yang ta ba jang tu ya la ani koran to paro ta zan do ye sung da re chi tan ta gan zo chigi mi che da pu gu pu tu na mi ta go di kala kale de yor ra ini su su kan yu chu yu gi ta pa da che 야 마유네 슈지 론주 제고에 말아 단데 마우네 주마네 보고 첨부 차서네 고고라디 갈라서 간다직 장한 고에 데바 예사나 갈레 야 니마지 람산 사마직 파게라 따고 드슈라 내가 저 망보질래 잠서 강이 튀라 드디드 소소기 직 생감게 근데 중에 쪽서 예사나 지네 야보라 야 마초시도 슈치 갈레잖아 안테스 셈 감다 강이 튀다
So now, moving on, one of us talked about how they are here to take inspiration from the teachings, and how they are not able to effectively dedicate enough time to their study and to their practice, since they have to juggle between kids, work, and other obligations. Now, it is important, I think, that we never lose the aspiration to study and practice. This is very important. And even if we do find ourselves at times juggling between so many responsibilities, it is important that even if you are not able to find any time to practice and to study, not to give up on this aspiration, because these circumstances change. Sometimes you grow out of your responsibilities. Sometimes it might be the case that in future you do not find yourselves encumbered by so many responsibilities. As your kids grow up, they grow up to be independent and so forth. Then if you hold on to that aspiration, then at that point, when you have the time, when you have the luxury and the leisure to practice and study, then you can approach it freshly with the same sense of enthusiasm. So it is important to keep that enthusiasm and aspiration alive.
아니 수수기 진정 공전체 아니 대도 진정자 로야라나 아니 지지 쇼라 같은데 카시 소소라 빼 데데 나라랑 송세상 이게 전화된 레이다 두주로라 심 안티가나 산다 아니 냠네체 슈슈 자체마 대 첨부 로야다 라마들 도야도 최셰 사타르 무데 가리네 강이 여라 보고다 참이디 네 수수기 강이 주유치 근데 제 기침으로 빼는 베베로 샤와나 에데라 파마즈 보고따도 보고 망보따도 제 안데시리가 신갈래가 제 로발래가 제 뭐라 늘로춘주가 그때 취체 깔리 카보 여대 가시야 네 보고도 침보차 소소소 내가 제 가르진 정도가 아니 파마도 띵겐도 용서도 보고를 받지 코난즈 추도 제 경고냠도 거라도 아니 질라마다 된데 추셔도 내지도 된데 되니 뭐라 다 디데 참아 집어 인고 말에 수수 지양 남다 루수다 서 가가라 봐
And now, with that being said, it is important to find some time, even if it is a very short time in a day, to our study and to our practice. For example, it could be simply reflecting on a particular verse that you relate to in a day, 5-10 minutes reflecting on it. Because there are so many verses in classical Buddhist texts. When you read them, you relate to them to such an extent wherein you begin to feel like the text or the verse is speaking directly to you. And if you have such experiences, it is important to note this kind of verses and to reflect on them daily. And even if you cannot dedicate time to attend teachings, even if you cannot find the time to study like the greater texts, it will be helpful indeed, and it is practical and realistic to reflect on one particular verse a day and to let that shape your motivation, to let that shape your reflection. And this is important. I think this is a practical approach we can take when we find ourselves juggling with so many responsibilities. Because now when we look at the traditional Tibetan household, then the parents, in the traditional way they live their lives in Tibet, they have to tend to the farm, they have to, if they are farmers, they have to tend to the farm, they have to do a lot of field work. If they are nomads, then they have their hands full. Then on top of that, they have to look after the kids, and then the parents really do not have much time to study and practice at all. So as such, when the kids grow up, then they let the kids shoulder all the responsibility of the household, and then they themselves retire into spirituality. At that point, dedicating all their time and energy towards attending teachings, taking pilgrimage, spending time with people of their own age, and so forth. Now, this is the Tibetan approach. So different countries have different customs, and maybe you can figure something out like that.
아니 찌기 갈라나 다 지난 거라 난줄 남쳐다 텐토나 제 장에 거기 뭐 브라이스라 들이 들리 고야 가스네 땡 얘기 찌기 시에들야 아니 코나 찌기 칼로 찌기 안 할때 사바라기르서 데바 tin데 진일레 인라도 다들이 지당 가서 제슬라네 코로나 때문에 요 바시샤 치티 갈랑서 빼다 아니 질롱도 타야 tin데 진시기래 아니 이때도 산도 마세 디올라 마타나 가서 파신 두 콜리기도 제세 나래노 tin데레 오데 갈라네 가서 라마 쳐방 가서 니레 가서 칸도 쳐줘래 되게 나로라서 아니야 제소 파시 둘라 아니 제슐로카 레스레스도 원드 참마스 자니 냠도 치니 마탄다 미트니 시야이라 tin데 인디 쳐나겠다 징예살이야 징 칼로타 치사와 싱게레 사메게 데버친레레 디디 콤투베레와 예스.
So moving on, one of us talked about how they hoped to gain some new insights by attending these teachings. So that now in our exploration of this particular text, 37 practices of all the bodhisattvas, as it is evident by now, we are trying to explore it with the source text itself, and then trying to relate it to our own experiences and how we can practically inculcate this as a part of our practice. And then similarly, now as we'll explore the text further, we will begin to approach what is called the 6 great perfections, such as the perfection of generosity and so forth. So in our discussions about these 6 great perfections, I am hoping to consult other sources, such as the offering to the gurus, another text wherein it talks about these 6 great perfections in detail. So we will try to compare how these 2 different texts approaches these practice of the 6 great perfections. And with this kind of approach, I hope that I am able to help you gain some new insights into these teachings.
아니 지금을 트와도 더바이나 야소로치라 저는 미 마음을 믿으시라 레라버다 미 마음을 더 마음이나 저지부 간도되나 마디 중도 차이입니다. 아니 디미와이나 아주 디다는 믿는도스
So at this point, I want to say that if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, because now it's a very small group, so you have an advantage because we can accommodate all the questions and doubts. If it is a big group, then we really do sometimes struggle to find the time to address every question and every doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
How can you practice this without feeling like a victim? I mean, because it's a little bit reminds me of Jesus' teaching, like turning the other cheek. And so wondering
Kurang gi thyo dirt. Tini nganzo gi dizo nyamle ngone chinasra. Ni ta soso chik mera dawa ina se deken do ra. Nöche dawa ina soso la pho deken do. Kadyu ina soso la chik dubu nyang denge do chi chagi do as. Tende nyamle ngone chi nge nasra. Ni di nganzo gi ni soso chik nyang degyo do chi ma chore ra. Dende che do nganzo gi khande nyamle che thu ge asra. Dizo khayo la gi nyamle che nas. Kain sena ni di chik mangbo sungye jo ra. Nyamle dende che gore la de ni tanda Yishu ge to ba Jesus. Kurang gi ni ma chik song jo do da pe drabo dusra. Pe na cha shan mi gi chrang la damja chik shunasra. An draba shinda de ten la ya rabo. O dende do drabo dusra. Ni de la de zamba soso khadu ni chik khur denge nyang denge rabo chi chage do as. Dende ma sore che do ni nganzo gi nyamle khonsu chuba khande che gore bes.
그래. 지당 가서 일로 공부하라 가서 나라라 이라 지당이 되다. 가서다. 아주 추념내 진이는데 되디워라. 남자 가서 되는 제가 술로다 되는 강의로 지냐면 라마 치다 주나. 된대로다. nga dine diris shambala sana kya kuch tangme ra suchi po samda rande khojule di khatu nga zo kar sangula na ta nga dine dishas ra shambala sana tangme la di jabla susala kange ra mi shamba chamala dunge nyande jila ranchi po la dewaji un kale khabar khas nga zo chikile ten de ra ra tinde ini nga zo changma chikile de diga nga pattan khatule susala jingya ji susala tonji ji chogo orete 되게 냠내 채와이나 소설의 개변체 소설의 신선의 시대 말이야. 그러와 아니 bên 계속 저런 게 페이지 샤와이나 미니 투버 샤와이나 그러와 또 저런 게 미디기 쓰지 라와들 카티 파짜와이나 계속 저 미디 파세다 뚝다 하르지 소투고이나 되게 다참아야 단독기 빙자이나래 아니 코나게 쇼게 미망보지 라는 그걸 강에 마티라 그러와 아니 단도 저랑게 지로보tom지 로파체네 파카데 짜와이나 파기 갈리갈리 되게 중바 되게 제캅 되게 딱 간다간에 쳇쳇도다 소소기 라오지부디마 뜨와이나 소소라 중게 라야마 소소 정한 로고야 라와다 소소라 나니에 포야다 도사마 나도 숨져 지기다 근데 쇼지는 가서 따데 nga 중으라서 와데 쇼지는 저랑에 계산라데 라
So now, when you bring up this question, I think it is important first to reflect on how exactly do we begin to identify as a victim, and how exactly do we sometimes play the victim. And when we look at it this very carefully, then we begin to notice that it comes from a self-cherishing attitude, wherein if we begin to understand the implication of this self-cherishing attitude, then we begin to understand the manner in which we feel like victims. For example, first, when we look at the manner in which we pursue and are concerned only about our own welfare and at the expense of others' welfare, then you begin to only think about you yourself feeling secure, right? You yourself being at ease, and you do not care if others are suffering or if others are at risk. And now, when we look at such an attitude, then is it really realistic to feel secure when all others around you are suffering? Maybe that's not a realistic attitude at all. When you begin to notice that others are suffering all around you, then it either means that you yourself are at the risk of suffering, or you yourself are not far from experiencing the same suffering. But when we are consumed by a self-cherishing attitude, we fail to appreciate that. We are content with ourselves being secure and safe, and we do not care, even if what we do affects other people negatively. And at that time, we do not look at others as victim. Now, when the roles are reversed, then we begin to feel that, others, I am suffering, and I am suffering, and only I am suffering. This is the attitude that we have. When we go through a particular experience that we do not enjoy, this is the kind of narrow-mindedness that we develop. That why is this happening only to me, when it is in fact a fact that it's a shared experience of humanity, that they go through this kind of challenges, these kind of experiences. So if we think about it carefully, then we begin to notice that it comes from cherishing the self too much, being too concerned with only our welfare. And similarly, now at this point, when we think about it carefully, are we the victim if we are able to overcome our outer enemies, or are we the victim if we are able to overcome our inner enemies? And this is important to understand, because, for example, you become angry with someone, and then you had a conflict with that person. And now, if you do not want to be the victim, then you would expend all your effort to effectively ensure that this person doesn't hurt you. So in that process, you will harm this person. You will try any means necessary to overcome what you perceive as your enemy, and to ensure that you do not become a victim of their harassment, of their assault, anything. And now, in that process, does it help to address the situation? It doesn't really help to address the situation. If you harm the other person, it might be the case that for immediate purposes, the other person might look vanquished, might look defeated, but there are people behind him who identify as his friends, his relatives, his parents, and then at a larger context, a neighborhood. Then this extends to communities. It can blow up. People will back him up. And then your own relatives, friends become involved. So you are actually adding fuel to the fire, and the situation blows up. So who exactly becomes the victim now? So rather than that, if you are able to overcome your inner enemy of anger, then even if you, for immediately, from the outset, it looks as if like you suffered some losses, but in the long run, it helps to protect you from suffering such negative consequences, not only for yourself, for others too.
니 배쳐지잖아. ngani ni de namdi pe chamboyo ta lo ni shusum ji ma chamboyo che chi sana nyam san do na nyam to de na khare ina chi kangi ji thena pha zo ro ba che andi chamboyo ina ra pe ji chana la pe ra pa de gi ni khong tho de gi ngala pheng gi de nu de ta ta pe ra pa ya po chana ra 당아니 ende chamboyo ni ma chi chongal chik nak poro chi la ina ra nange zoba komto는 아니 도보 도모인데 가리네디 란자 되기 계신 아니 참고해 발라 때는 그냥 도보 도모 얘기 도보 도모 참마 참마자 나 참마 시들린자로 레고라 아니 도모를 그 도모를 참마야 참도 샤이라 단 이마지 그냥 알스 나버질라는 얘기들 zoba 고마데는 저는 맨날이 나슬라 배를 주여로 라과자 안데 지나 되는 좀도 아니 게도 차이라 겐데 차이인데 갈라다 디 차운데 갈라 디 예 미참마 아니 랐다니 마가야 차이 그것도 빼두자 두다니 뭐 참부든데 다 투바자 아니 실레 nga ngarani la kiwe ba chasa ngarani din gen do ma se ye me du zo yang zo la thona ya bo me ba dang su su chi bo me ba shu su shu lo do na ngo cha go ya ra ande ro di ka sa na di ngi khondro ge chera ye khondro di kala na so so ya cha be ge chi ra nga khole je ta be chi de de jong ngar ra yo pe di sha wa na ta dende chi nu de kala ani Tati ngazo shilo la thong shin ba chike. Tati mayin ke pe nge gi chula khonro ji kyonga la tsik na ba jila nge chula ba khonro la nga je khatha ba cha nge chula shujura khari ne sotu wa ina ya. Tanga na lo de nga chi wo yore. Nge lo mambu yu thomo de nge tari ende chi sa sa no. Yang di mayin na tando khonro la ne ko nga la pe ende tari shu su la ne. Diga sano yang ji ko de na kang gi senkam la ne ya. Ra chik diligido chik kyanagi khalaji sana thoayo mare sanotana chik semba chiboyo mare ni khune chiboyo mare namdu chik khala shese roje dembe kharasagi na thoa chambu chibo ha hula nami nyamdo dewaina tidugala ta chara la sare nyasa badano charo ti ngi khondo dige khondo lambal tene kangi de chungra ngi tidugala kyanagi zeba gomeina ngani de trobo raja de ngal di kangi sama yueyo mare ti nga zo kesara benefit ra ta di mai ke ta nga zo miti na lo khayo la yara ti mai ke ge ya nga zo chue khelen ji na kana zubo gom la tene zube gin de wud la jao shuma nga zo khelen ji na zubo gom la tene ani chi zu zawa de ge hi ji wud de che ya ge de yore ani zubo gom la tene tenjo ge milu thawa ra ten sang thawa de ge phen do yara shesan gon number 타지 ngazu 그 sambal라 ngazu 중라도 상으로 마시 딘데기 년부 때도는 스스로 계산해야 돼요. 라.
So now if I explore this further with a very simple example, now try to relate to this example. Let's say that you and I, we are very close friends who have spent, who know each other for decades. So we eat together, we travel together, we live together, and we help each other in times of need. But a moment of anger can ruin this relationship of trust, faith, and confidence. It might be the case that you utter some words that I particularly do not enjoy, and in a moment of anger, I retaliate excessively, and either vocally or to in extreme cases, it might be the case that I also react physically by assaulting you and so forth. So we already talked about how we suffer more as a consequence of our reaction to these kind of situations, and this is an example. Now, failing to restrain ourselves in this moment of anger, if we retaliate, then we now are in conflict. We now are at odds, and now all these, all the years that we spent cultivating this relationship comes to an end. And as such, the people who know us begin to look at us now with hesitation. When they look at us, that even though they were so close for so many years, at this point, they no longer talk to each other. They are at odds with each other. So as such, there is a difficulty in facing the people who knows us. And now this is the kind of immediate effect of losing our temper in that moment. Then, when you go back to your room, it might be the case that I feel a sense of fulfillment in being able to immediately retaliate to you. But when I go back, then as anger subsides, then when you begin to think about the situation, you develop a sense of regret that now this relationship has been destroyed by a single moment of anger. And then this thought, it stays with you for a long time. And if the more you think about it, the more distressed you become. And as such, it takes a toll on your mental health. So this is the manner in which a single moment of anger can have such far-reaching negative consequences, far-reaching as well as immediate consequences. So what exactly are we the victim of now? We are the victim of the inner enemy of anger, rather than the expression of these anger in the external world. So it is important to bring ourselves to contemplate on the negative consequences of these disturbing emotions. Now this is strictly from a very rough example, and trying to relate it to our own experiences. Now from a spiritual perspective, it is said that if one cultivates forbearance in the face of anger, then if you are someone who practices Buddhism as your spiritual practice, then through the cultivation of forbearance in this life, it is said that in your next life you will be blessed with beautiful physical appearance, and that it also helps you to take birth in a favorable state in your next life. So these are the kind of considerations one takes in engaging in the practice of forbearance and restraining ourselves from engaging in anger.
kantan dire de remdara sasanta nge la chi marta santanta ngoni da kira misna chi de ngato ke mela controla ya do chung yu jira tigala santan o ti dire de rem mig la chi bu mai santa de pekhi chi mar.
So as I try to explore it in this manner, do you think that this is indeed the case? That when you try to relate it to your own experiences, because it is indeed the case that in our lives we have at one point reacted out of anger, or we have made others angry.
Yeah, chidong. Yeah.
The situations can be very complicated, but it's generally.
대 kira chi bu mari mi mangbo chi ge sambo ra ngone nga chung ki me la ja la war de ine chung ma ga ki kya ra wa ine jile chung ra pe na ngam zamni ga ma je ni ra ri mi la ma je pa ge to ra kha de zo tsere ta ko chi bu de ye de mun da ti jile ya kon zu xin na yo ga di ne ngam ra xin na ka di je san ta ten ro ra je ngam zu mi ge ba le ine ande de je kap de je ka ine mi bo choba do choba ine 정말 리바땅나 찌버려라. 라 파길라지 이 카티지 짜투는 수수집을 대합니다. 라
동물한 게 딜스 참삼 욕다 사보 연구열에스라 이네다 지르당 삼로 땅나 치나 다가랑 레스. So it is not only you who have a similar experience like this, because generally people have this attitude that, oh, I wouldn't ever want to take any loss upon myself. I don't want to suffer any loss at all. This is the attitude that we have, and this kind of attitude informs all our reactions in most of the cases. But when we think really carefully about it, it is important, I think, to realize that if we let our reactions and our behaviors always be informed by this kind of attitude, then even though for immediate purposes we might not suffer any losses, and we might maybe sometime get the impression that we gain something out of it, but in the long run we are setting ourselves up for hurt, disappointment and loss. Because if you think about it, a nation attacks another nation, and then that nation feels like some sense of accomplishment in being able to defeat the other nation. Now, is the nation now secure? If you think about it, for immediate purpose, in the short term, of course, yes, they might feel secure now that they are able to attack the other nation. But in the long run, the security that they intend to protect they put that at risk now, because now they have to live, and they have to inform their policies with a sense of paranoia in the future. They have to now live in a constant state of paranoia that the other nation might attack at any point now. So that's similar with regards to interpersonal relationships, with regards to intercommunal relationships. It's similar. So sorry. We overshot by a few minutes now. At this point, we break for lunch.